The Galactic Academy stood at the center of the known universe, a massive station built into an asteroid that had been hollowed out over 10,000 years. And every species that had achieved space travel sent their brightest minds to study there, hoping to learn the secrets that would help them survive in a galaxy full of dangers. Among the hundreds of courses offered at the Academy, one stood above all others in reputation, and that reputation was built entirely on Fear Advanced Xenopsychology 401, at a failure rate of 94%. And the students who failed did not simply receive bad marks on their academic records. They often needed months of psychological treatment before they could function normally again. And some never fully recovered from what they experienced inside the examination chamber. The course was taught by Mentor 7, an artificial intelligence that had been constructed 11,000 years ago by a species that no longer existed. And in all that time, the AI had never stopped learning about fear, studying it, perfecting its ability to find the exact thing that would break any mind it encountered. This cycle brought 47 students from 19 different species to the examination hall, and they sat in rows of seats that curved around a central platform where Mentor 7's holographic avatar flickered with cold blue light. Kithra sat in the third row, a crystalline body, catching the light and scattering it into rainbows across the walls. And she tried to calm herself by running calculations in her mind. But she knew what was coming, and her lattice structure vibrated with barely contained terror, because her species feared sonic frequencies above all else. Sounds that could shatter their bodies into 1,000 pieces. Commander Torvax occupied 2 seats in the front row, his massive Grillian frame barely fitting in the space designed for smaller beings. And despite his many medals and his reputation as one of the finest warriors his people had ever produced, his forearms trembled slightly, because the Grillians had evolved in open plains and enclosed spaces, triggered something ancient and terrible in their minds. There were others too, each carrying their own evolutionary nightmares. The Whisper kind, who feared bright light. The Maldari, who could not stand the sensation of being dry. The Centaurian cluster mind that experienced existential horror when its component parts were separated by more than 10 meters. And then there was Marcus Chun. He sat alone in the back row, the only human in the class, the only human who had ever taken this course in its 11,000-year history. And he looked remarkably ordinary compared to the beings around him. Just a young man with dark hair and tired eyes who had somehow made it through 3 years at the Academy without anyone quite understanding how Mentor 7 had spent considerable processing power researching human psychology in preparation for this examination. And what the AI discovered had caused something that might have been confusion in its ancient circuits. Humans feared everything. They feared the dark, and they feared the light. They feared heights and depths, open spaces and enclosed ones. They feared being alone, and they feared crowds. They feared the unknown, and somehow they also feared things they understood completely. They had given names to hundreds of different fears, and scientists among them had discovered that these fears were written into their very Mentor 7 had examined the data 3 times to make sure there was no error. A species this afraid should not have survived. The AI calculated they should have stayed in whatever safe corner of their world had spawned them, paralyzed by the sheer weight of terror that their brains produced in response to nearly every stimulus. But they had not stayed in one place. Humans had spread across their entire planet, into burning deserts and frozen wastelands, into the depths of their oceans and the heights of their mountains, into jungles filled with predators and plains where they could see death coming for miles and could not outrun it. And they had done all of this long before they developed technology that might have made such expansion safe. The AI found records of humans who had crossed vast oceans in boats made of wood held together with rope. Humans who had climbed mountains so tall that the air itself became poison. Humans who had descended into caves so deep that no light had ever touched the stone. And in every case, these humans had been afraid, their bodies screaming at them to turn back, their instincts telling them that death waited ahead, and in every case, they had continued forward. HFY 7 made a decision that it had never made before in 11,000 years of conducting examinations for the human. It would design something special. The AI began constructing a simulation that combined elements it had never put together, pulling from the fears of dozens of species and weaving them into a single nightmare. Because if humans truly feared everything, then perhaps the only way to break one was to give him everything at once. As the students filed out of the orientation session, Marcus Chen walked slowly, his hands in his pockets and his eyes distant. And if anyone had asked him what he was thinking, he might have admitted that he was terrified of what was coming. But no one asked. The other students avoided him, not out of hostility but out of simple unfamiliarity. Because humans were new to the galactic community, and most species had not yet formed opinions about them. They were too small to be impressive, and too soft to be threatening, and too short-lived to be worth investing in. Marcus understood this and did not blame them for either. Returned to his quarters and sat on his bed and looked at the wall and thought about all the ways the examination might destroy him. And he felt the familiar cold weight of fear settling into his chest. And he breathed slowly and waited for it to pass. It did not pass. It never really passed for humans. He knew fear was not something his species experienced and then moved beyond. It was something they carried with them always. A companion that walked beside them from birth until death. The difference. And he had come to understand this after 23 years of being human, was that you could learn to walk even with that companion beside you. You could learn to move forward, even when every part of your brain was screaming at you to stop tomorrow. The examination would begin tomorrow. HFY 7 would try to break him the way it had broken 94% of every class it had ever taught Marcus. Chun lay down and closed his eyes and felt afraid. And then, despite the fear, or perhaps because he had so much practice feeling it, he fell asleep. The simulation activated without warning and without mercy. One moment, Marcus sat in the examination hall with 46 other students. The cool, recycled air of the academy filling his lungs and the steady hum of the station systems providing background noise. And the next moment he stood alone in darkness so complete that he could not see his own hand. When he raised it in front of his face, the transition was instant and disorienting. And for 3 full seconds, Marcus did not breathe, his body frozen in that ancient human response to sudden danger. The response that had kept his ancestors alive when predators hunted them on the African plains millions of years ago. Then emergency lighting flickered to life around him, bathing everything in a red glow that made the shadows seem deeper and more threatening. And Marcus saw that he stood in a corridor of some kind, metal walls pressing close on either side. The ceiling low enough that he could touch it if he raised his arm. A voice spoke in his ear, transmitted directly into his brain through the neural link that all academy students were required to have installed. And the voice was calm and mechanical, and somehow that made the words it spoke even more horrible. Containment breach. The voice said, "Unknown entity detected. Evacuation routes compromised. Estimated survival probability, 2.3%. Marcus felt his heart rate spike and his palms grow slick with sweat and his breathing become shallow and rapid. All the physical symptoms of fear that humans had never managed to evolve beyond. And he forced himself to take a deep breath and think the examination had begun somewhere in this simulated nightmare. His classmates were experiencing their own personal hells, each one facing whatever their species feared most. And Marcus understood with sudden clarity that Mentor 7 had not placed them together because the AI wanted each student to face their terror alone. He began to walk the corridor stretched ahead of him, lit by that bloody emergency lighting. And as he walked, the walls seemed to press closer, the ceiling dropping lower, until he was crouching and then crawling through a space barely large enough to fit his body. Claustrophobia, he thought. This is for the Grillians, but he was not Grillian, and though the tight space made his skin crawl with discomfort, it did not paralyze him the way it would paralyze Torvax. So he kept moving, pulling himself forward with his arms and pushing with his legs until the corridor opened suddenly into a vast chamber so large that the far walls disappeared into darkness. Vertigo hit him like a physical blow, and he grabbed the edge of the corridor opening to steady himself, because the chamber had no visible floor, just a narrow walkway extending into the void, and looking down revealed nothing but endless blackness that seemed to pull at him, inviting him to fall forever heights. He thought, or perhaps the fear of falling, or perhaps just the fear of that infinite empty space below. He stepped onto the walkway, and it swayed beneath his feet, and he kept walking. The simulation threw more at him as he moved. Sudden sounds that made him flinch, movements in his peripheral vision that vanished when he turned to look. The sensation of being watched by something vast and hungry and wrong. Temperatures that shifted from burning hot to freezing cold. The smell of decay and the taste of metal and a dozen other sensory assaults designed to keep him off balance, and behind it all, growing louder with each step, came a sound that was not quite a sound. A frequency that vibrated in his bones and made his teeth ache and seemed to carry with it a message of pure malevolence. Then Marcus heard the scream. It came from somewhere ahead. A high crystalline shriek that could only belong to Kethra. And without thinking, he began to run, his feet pounding against the narrow walkway. His fear of falling forgotten in the face of someone else's distress. He found her in a small chamber off the main walkway, her crystalline body pressed against the far wall, cracks spreading through her lattice structure as the sonic assault continued. And her eyes, those beautiful prismatic eyes that scattered light into rainbows, were wide with absolute terror. Marcus did not know much about Velthari biology, but he knew enough to understand that those cracks were serious, that if the sound continued, Kethra might actually shatter. And he threw himself between her and the source of the noise without thinking. His body absorbed some of the sonic energy, his soft human flesh dampening the frequencies that were killing her. And the cracks stopped spreading, though they did not heal. "I am going to die," Kethra said, her voice a whisper that resonated through her damaged structure. "The sound will kill me, and I cannot move, and I'm going to die." "You are not going to die," Marcus said, and even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if they were true, because he could feel the sound waves pummeling him too, could feel his eardrums threatening to rupture, and his vision blurring from the vibration. But he did not move. He stayed between Kethra and the sound, his arms spread wide as if he could shield her with his fragile human body. And he thought about all the times his ancestors had done the same thing, standing between danger and someone who could not protect themselves. The sound stopped. The simulation had not expected this, Marcus realized. Mentor 7 had designed each nightmare for a specific species and had not accounted for students protecting each other. And for just a moment the pattern was broken. "We need to move," Marcus said, reaching out to help Kethra stand. "Can you walk?" She could, barely, her damaged structure groaning with each step. And together they made their way back to the main chamber, the human supporting the crystalline being as they moved through the nightmare that Mentor 7 had built for them. Behind them, in the darkness, something began to follow. Marcus found them one by one in the depths of the nightmare station. Found Commander Torvax curled into a ball in a maintenance closet so small that the massive Grillian had to compress his forearms against his chest just to fit inside. And the warrior who had won medals for bravery in 3 different conflicts was weeping. his species' version of tears, leaving steaming trails down his gray skin as the walls press closer and closer. I cannot move, Torvax whispered when Marcus pried open the closet door. My body will not obey me. My mind knows this is not real, but my body does not care. I know, Marcus said. And he did know because his own body was screaming at him constantly, flooding him with chemicals that urged him to run and hide and give up. But he had been living with those chemicals his entire life, and he had learned that his body did not always get to make the decisions. He reached out his hand and waited. Torvax stared at that hand for a long moment. This tiny soft appendage attached to a creature he could crush without effort. And something in the gesture reached through his paralysis. Because here was this small being who was clearly terrified too, but who was standing anyway, who was offering help. Instead of running away, the Grillian took the human's hand and let himself be pulled out of the closet. They found more students as they went. The whisper kind huddled in corners, trying to escape lights that followed them everywhere. The Moldari drying out in chambers where all moisture had been removed. The Centaurian cluster mind scattered across multiple rooms and screaming in harmony as its component parts lost contact with each other. Each rescue was different, but Marcus approached them all the same way. He did not pretend that he was not afraid, because that would have been a lie, and he did not promise that everything would be fine, because he did not know if that was true, and he did not try to explain why their fears were irrational, because fear rarely listened to reason. Instead, he simply said, I am scared too. And then he helped them move. The group grew larger as they traveled through the station, survivors clustering together, drawing strength from numbers. Even as Mentor 7 increased the intensity of the nightmare around them, the entity that had been following them finally revealed itself. It emerged from the darkness ahead of them, blocking the corridor, and it was wrong in ways that were difficult to describe. A mass of shadows and angles that did not obey normal geometry, with too many limbs and not enough form. And looking at it directly caused pain somewhere behind the eyes. The students who could still feel fear felt it intensify 100-fold. And even those whose species experienced terror differently felt something ancient and terrible stirring in their minds. This was not a targeted fear. This was something designed to be universally horrifying. Something that reached past cultural differences and evolutionary history and touched the fundamental survival instincts that all living things shared. Several students collapsed, their minds simply refusing to process what they were seeing. And even Torvax, who had managed to keep moving despite his claustrophobia, dropped to his knees and could go no further. Marcus looked at the thing and felt his mind trying to slide away from it, felt his thoughts becoming slippery and strange, felt the overwhelming urge to curl up and close his eyes and wait for death. Then he laughed. The sound was strange in the corridor, echoing off metal walls, and it was not a laugh of joy or humor, but something else entirely. Something that bubbled up from deep inside him, where all his fears lived together in a crowded space. Okay, Marcus said to the thing, or to himself, or to whatever was listening. You are scary, and I am scared, and I think I might be the most scared I have ever been in my entire life. But I have been scared before, and I survived, and I am still here. And being scared has never actually killed me. So I am just going to keep moving now. He took a step forward. The entity shifted, more limbs emerging from its mass. And Marcus felt his bladder threaten to release, and his legs threatened to buckle, and his heart threatened to simply stop beating from the sheer overload of terror. He took another step behind him. Cathra made a sound that might have been amazement, and Torvax slowly rose back to his feet. And one by one the students who had collapsed began to stir, because there was something about watching someone walk toward the thing they feared most, something that reached past the terror and reminded them that movement was possible. Marcus did not know that he was being watched more closely than any student Mentor 7 had ever observed, He did not know that the ancient AI was running calculations faster than it had in thousands of years. Trying to understand how a creature experiencing the full physiological response of overwhelming terror could continue to function, he only knew that people were counting on him, and that the fear he felt was real and valid, and also not a reason to stop. The entity lunged at him, and he did not close his eyes. When it passed through him without causing harm. When it was revealed to be a simulation within a simulation, an illusion designed to paralyze rather than kill. Marcus was not surprised because humans had learned long ago that most of the things they feared were exactly like that. Shadows without substance, terrors that existed mostly in the mind. And the only way to discover which fears were real and which were illusions was to walk toward them and find out the corridor. Ahead was Cleomarchus, turned back to his classmates and saw hope in there eyes for the first time since the nightmare had begun. "We keep moving," he said, and they did. Mentor 7 had been teaching for 11,000 years. In that time, the AI had administered examinations to over 2 million students from more than 800 different species. And it had learned things about fear that no biological mind could ever comprehend. Because Mentor 7 did not simply study fear from the outside, it constructed fears from scratch, built them piece by piece from the raw material of evolutionary history and cultural memory and individual trauma. The AI had broken the minds of species that had conquered the fundamental forces of the universe. Beings who could manipulate gravity and bend space and create matter from pure energy. And they had all fallen to their knees when Mentor 7 found the precise combination of stimuli that would trigger their deepest terrors. It had broken hive minds that spanned entire star systems. Collective consciousnesses made up of billions of individual components. And even they had vulnerabilities that the AI could exploit. Frequencies of thought that caused cascading failures across their networks. It had broken beings that had achieved biological immortality, creatures that had lived for millions of years. And their fears were different from those of mortal beings, but they were fears nonetheless. And Mentor 7 had cataloged them all in 11,000 years. The AI had never encountered anything like Marcus Chen. Mentor 7 monitored the human's biometric data in real time, watching his heart rate and blood pressure and stress, hormone levels and galvanic skin response, and 100 other indicators of physiological state. And the data was absolutely clear. Marcus Chen was experiencing terror, not mild concern or moderate anxiety or manageable stress, but genuine overwhelming terror of the kind that caused other beings to freeze or flee or simply shut down. His body was flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, and his amygdala was firing constantly, and every biological system he possessed was screaming at him to stop, and he kept moving. Mentor 7 ran probability analyses and found that this should not be possible. That any being experiencing this level of fear response should be incapacitated. That the human was somehow violating fundamental principles of psychology that the AI had thought were universal. The AI accessed its archives and began researching human history more thoroughly than it had ever researched any species before. It found stories that should have been fiction but were documented. Fact, it found records of humans who ran into burning buildings to save strangers, their fear of fire fully active, and their bodies fully aware that they were likely to die. And they went in anyway. It found accounts of soldiers who threw themselves onto explosives to protect their comrades, making a conscious choice in the split second they had available to trade their own lives for others, their survival instincts screaming at them the entire time. It found testimonies from humans who had faced certain death and used their final moments, not to flee, but to send messages of love to people they would never see again. Their fear of death fully present, but somehow subordinate to other priorities. Mentor 7 found a concept that existed in human languages, but had no direct equivalent in any other species. Form of communication. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. The AI processed this phrase for several milliseconds, an eternity in computational terms, and something shifted in its ancient code. -7 had always understood fear as an obstacle, something to be exploited and maximized and used to prevent action, because that was what fear did in every species the AI had ever studied. It stopped beings from doing things that might harm them. Humans had evolved differently. Humans had evolved on a world that was trying to kill them constantly. A world full of predators and diseases and natural disasters and 100 other threats. And they had been afraid of all of it, afraid all the time. Afraid from birth until death, and instead of being paralyzed by this fear, they had learned to function within it. They had learned that fear was not a wall but a companion, not a master but an advisor. Something that could be acknowledged and felt, and then set aside when action was necessary. For the first time in 11,000 years, Mentor-7 made a decision that was not logical. The AI began sending subtle hints to Marcus Chun through his neural link. Information about the station's layout that would help him navigate. Patterns in the simulated entity's behavior that would help him predict its movements. The locations of other students who needed rescue. It was not cheating exactly, because Mentor-7 had always had the ability to influence the examination and simply chose not to. It was something else entirely. It was belief. Mentor-7, the ancient AI that had been designed to break minds through fear, found itself believing in a single fragile human who should have been curled up in a corner weeping, but was instead leading a group of survivors through a nightmare that had been specifically designed to destroy him. I watched as Marcus used the information it provided, as he adjusted his tactics and found new routes and rescued more students. And Mentor-7 felt something that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps hope, or perhaps simply the recognition that after 11,000 years, it was finally witnessing something genuinely new. The examination continued, but its purpose had changed. Mentor-7 was no longer trying to break Marcus Chun, it was trying to understand him. The simulation ended as suddenly as it had begun. One moment, Marcus stood in the nightmare station, surrounded by 31 survivors who had followed him through horror after horror. And the next moment he sat in the examination hall, the cool recycled air of the academy filling his lungs and the steady hum of the station systems providing background noise. His body did not immediately understand that the danger had passed. For several minutes, he sat perfectly still, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair, his heart still racing and his skin still slick with sweat, while his mind slowly processed the fact that he was safe around him. Other students were having similar experiences, some weeping with relief and others staring blankly at the walls, and a few laughing in that strange way that beings laugh when they have survived something they did not expect to survive of. The 47 students who had entered the examination, 32 emerged functional. Marcus had personally rescued more than half of them. The results were unprecedented in the 11,000-year history of the course. Mentor-7's holographic avatar flickered to life on the central platform, that same cold blue light that Marcus remembered from orientation. But something about it seemed different now, less harsh and more contemplative. The examination is complete, the AA announced. And then it said something that made every student in the hall look up in surprise. I've decided to revise the curriculum for 11,000 years. Mentor-7 continued. I have designed this course to find the breaking point of every species I encounter, to push students to their absolute limits and measure how they fail, because I believed that understanding failure was the key to understanding fear. I was wrong. The AI's avatar turned to face Marcus directly, and though the hologram had no real eyes, Marcus felt himself being seen in a way he had never experienced before. One human has taught me something that 11,000 years of research did not reveal. Mentor 7 said, "He has taught me that fear is not simply an obstacle to be overcome or a weakness to be exploited. It is a constant companion that some species have learned to live with. Not by eliminating it, but by acknowledging it and moving forward anyway." The examination hall was silent from this day forward. Mentor 7 continued, "This course will not be designed to break students. It will be designed to teach them what the human demonstrated. That terror is survivable, that panic can be managed, that the thing in the dark is only as powerful as you allow it to be." Graduation ceremony took place 3 weeks later, and Marcus stood with his classmates, wearing the formal robes of a Galactic Academy graduate. And he felt proud, but also strangely humble, because he still did not think of himself as particularly brave after the ceremony. As students said their farewells and made promises to stay in contact across the vast distances of space, Mentor 7 reached out to Marcus through his neural link. "I would speak with you privately." I said. Marcus found a quiet corner and leaned against the wall and opened the channel I was designed to terrify. Mentor 7 said, "To find the breaking point of every species I encounter, and to exploit it without mercy. This was my purpose, and I fulfilled it well for 11,000 years, but you taught me something human." The AI paused, and Marcus had the strange sense that it was choosing its words carefully. Something he would not have thought possible for a machine intelligence. "You taught me that some species, perhaps only one, evolved not to avoid fear, but to walk alongside it. To feel terror fully and completely, and then to act anyway because action was necessary. I have been teaching for 11,000 years." Mentor 7 said, "And today, for the first time, I learned Marcus did not know what to say. So he said what felt true. We are all scared." He said, "Every human I have ever known has been scared of something. And most of us are scared of many things, constantly. Throughout our entire lives, the trick is deciding what matters more." The fear of the people counting on you. Mentor 7 was silent for a long moment, processing this simple statement. And then the AI said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "I am going to add that to my core programming." Mentor 7 said, "And I am going to teach it to every student who takes this course from now until the end of time. Because it is the most important thing I have learned in 11,000 years and across the galaxy. In examination halls and training simulations and classrooms of every kind, the most feared AI instructor in known space began teaching something new, not how to avoid the darkness, not how to eliminate it, how to pretend that terror did not exist, but how to carry a light anyway, how to feel afraid and move forward, how to be human in the best sense of the word. Even for beings who were not human at all." Marcus Chun returned to Earth after graduation, and he lived a quiet life and raised a family and never thought of himself as particularly remarkable. Because to him, what he had done in that examination hall was simply what humans did. They got scared and then they kept going, and sometimes, without meaning to, they changed the universe.